In this video, we'll discuss string interpolation, property binding, event binding, and two-way binding using Angular. So hey, Angular string interpolation takes a property, a field, a function, or a simple statement like you see here and converts it into a string and places it in your DOM. So in this first case, we have an isShow true-false property and a ternary operator, and then either a true statement or a false statement. Currently false, we can flip this over and make it true, and now it says showing. That's one way of using interpolation. Other times, just a simple binding to a field, in this case, test property is a string, its current value is property, an ng on init counter, which is just a number, so that's converted into a string here. And in this particular case, we're binding this class style, which is called test, to a style that I built on this SCSS file called test, which just makes this turn red. So you can do this with styles or basically anything else that can take a string literal. You can bind that into a class. You can even combine multiple classes on here and have a couple different of these interpolation bindings on a class if you like. So that's how you use interpolation. Angular property binding is passing in a value from a parent to a child. In this case, we're on the lifecycle parent, and we're passing a value into the lifecycle child called number. So here we can see number is set to 1, and we pass that into the child, which needs an input of client number, which we initialize to 0. So we're passing in this number property up here to this client number property here on the lifecycle child component here. And we're binding it through string interpolation here, child input number 1. And just to kind of show you, it was initialized to 0. We pass in a 1 to overwrite it, and then we display that value here. So whenever you see property binding, these square brackets, just think a pass in from a parent to a child. Event binding is a pass out from a child to the parent. So in this particular case, we're going to look at the init counter hitter event, which assigns to the add init function, and passing is the value that it passed up to the parent, which in this case is always going to be the number 1. This is just the counter function that's going to increment this ng on init. So let's go, we're going to put the find there, and we're going to go to the lifecycle child. So Control F to pull that up real quick. And let's look at this. So here's our init counter hit. There's a number. So we can see that it requires an output type, and we use event emitter, and then the type within the brackets there. And we go ahead and instantiate that output event. And whenever we want to use it, we need to call the .emit. So we call this event emitter function right here, .emit, and then it passes out the value to the parent and recognized by this init counter hit, and that's just the parentheses item here. So this takes that 1 that's passed up, and it binds it to an event. And this could be a string, a model, a custom object that you throw up, and it's going to bind that value into the event, and you're going to pass that into the add init function here. And we're going to see it's just the number, which is 1 plus equal this value. So that's just how we keep this a really simple counter going. So I hope after going through this, you understand that an event emitter is a value on the child that's passing the value up to the parent so that the parent can use that value. So let's discuss Angular two-way binding. Two-way binding is a combination of property and event binding using the input decorator and the output decorator together to keep your parent and your child in sync. So it's denoted with a combination of bracket and parentheses, just like the combination of the property or the event binding. And it allows us to bind to, in this case, a field on the front end called testProp, which has the value of property on initialization. We pass that into the child, and we keep it in sync on the parent with this string interpolation, which you can see right here. So let's look at the child and show you how it works. So on the child, we have an input and an output. The input has a value of prop, and the output has a value of prop plus the word change. And that's important for Angular to detect that this is two-way binding. You need an output and you need a prop change. And the input is set as a string and the output is an emitter of a string. And these have to be in sync. You'll get an error if they're not. And just as a guard, we do a difference check. We make sure the value passed in is different than the value of the property, which is stored in this field, returned in the getter here with this field. So if it's different, we'll allow it to go through, fire the prop change event. It'll go to the parent, keep the parent in sync. And of course, we set the value to the property right here before we do all that. In this way, if there's a programmatic change somewhere and these are set to be the same value, it doesn't keep firing up to the parent and it keeps just kind of going back into the child and doing layout changes. So that's important to guard for that in those edge cases. So let's kind of see this in use. So we have the property value set, it's passed in, there's property. We make some changes here, add a couple A's. This is passed up to the parent here. And as you see, the test property value is kept in sync with the child. And that in a nutshell is how two-way binding works. So let's just recap this. The property value is the same as the property value here with an input and an output. The output has prop change. You can fire this event from anywhere. We're just firing it from the setter here, but if there's somewhere else on the page you're running a function and that forces this value to be changed and you want to keep the parent in sync, you can fire that value anywhere using this prop change. And on the parent, because it knows this is two-way binding, it'll take that prop change event and store it in the test prop. So I hope that kind of demystifies what two-way binding is, and so now you can use it. Thanks for watching the video. Like, comment, subscribe below. And if you want to discuss any consulting services, look for my email in the description. Thanks.